No one tell this dude about this movie. Good evening. My name's Evan, and welcome to Rocklin Graves. Over the past few months, there's been a movie I've been meaning to check out because I kept hearing about how insane it was, and after that weird Terrifier 3 controversy and a few people bringing this movie up in relation to that, I figured it was about damn time I actually sat down and watched the thing. When Evil Lurks premiered at TIFF back in September and got a theatrical release closely followed by it dropping on Shudder in October, and it very quickly gained a lot of traction for being this super intense and violent movie that also had a lot going on beyond that. What an interesting concept that an incredibly violent movie can still be more than just a gore simulator. Who could have known? Okay, so this is an Argentinian movie, so I have to say right off the top that I'm probably gonna butcher the names of actors and characters. Just bear with me, please. I'm doing my best. Written and directed by Demian Rugna, When Evil Lurks tells the story of two brothers in a rural village who try to dispose of a possessed and rotten man, accidentally losing him and unleashing hell in the process. I will be spoiling the movie since I think anyone who's interested in watching this video has probably already seen it, but if you haven't gotten around to it, here's what I'll say. Buckle up. Okay, now leave. Late one night, brothers Pedro and Jaime hear gunshots going off in the woods and discover a mutilated body the next morning that looks to have been cut with something and not killed by an animal, so they begin searching for some clues about who this man is and who's responsible for his death. The search leads them to a house where a family of three live happily in the serene countryside. Uriel must take after his father. The opening section of this movie is really strong and establishes a world that I found fascinating, where these possessed ones and rottens are a sort of ghost story that are quietly dealt with by professionals, known as cleaners, because they need to be disposed of in a very specific way so as to not accidentally cause the possession to spread. Firearms are off the table entirely as a method of disposal, and you just can't trust the general population to follow health guidelines that have been thoroughly researched and proven to work. In the movie, of course. Apparently one of those cleaners was sent a long time ago but never actually showed up, and the local authorities aren't much help when they learn that Uriel is still alive. It took me a little while to really understand what the role of these possessed ones was in this world, because at first it seems like everyone accepts them as real and it almost feels like they're a common occurrence, but as the movie goes on it becomes more clear that while they're not treated like a myth, they're rare enough that a lot of people will doubt that you actually did see one. Easily one of the best things about When Evil Lurks is the visual style. It's shot really well, but I'm also talking about how the landscapes add to this feeling of isolation that's really integral to making this work. You get this sense that once things go off the rails, these people really are on their own. After seeing how little the police seem to care about fixing the problem with Uriel, the brothers go to the landowner Ruiz to ask for his help.
¿Y el intendente entonces? Lo llamaron. Estaba enterado ya hace un año.
He's very unhappy with how the whole thing was handled and almost breaks one of the biggest rules about disposing of these things before getting the brothers to help him load the unsightly bastard into his truck to drop him off far away. Uriel, he's absolutely disgusting. They did a really fantastic job at making this stand out from your standard possession. He's just this pustulous blob squelching with every move, but I don't want to be too hard on him because I'm currently playing Baldur's Gate 3, Cyberpunk 2077, and Tavern Master simultaneously, so I'd imagine that I'm not far off from this state on my days off. It gets even worse when they go to transport him from his bed to the truck because his juices start oozing through the sheet they're using to carry him. I hate everything about this, and it's amazing. I'm such a sucker for any form of practical makeup, and I know most of you are as well, and this is a really detailed and absolutely revolting design that I'm glad they put all this work into because it helps to establish just how gnarly this all is. You still get the possession lines you expect, but the actual design sets this apart from the rest. Another thing that needs to be commended early on is how effortlessly these characters are set up. You get a really good sense of everyone's roles and their relationships to each other because the movie doesn't over-explain all of that and make it feel forced. It feels like we're intercepting their day, not being artificially caught up on their year. Ruiz isn't in the movie for long, but Louise Ziembrowski gave my favorite performance in his short screen time. I'm trying my best with the names. This dude turns into a ball of stress who just wants to take control and get shit done. That drive is exactly what leads him to storm out of his house in the middle of the meal with his wife and go take care of Uriel himself, since he knows the authorities aren't doing anything about it. And it's here where my biggest issue with this movie shows its face, and unfortunately, it's not a minor one. It is well established that these people know damn well that the rotten need to be handled in a very specific way. That's the exact reason Pedro went to the police when he found out about Uriel, even though we know he's armed and could handle the situation himself. You can't shoot these dudes. And the movie sets up a bunch of rules later on that need to be followed if you want to survive the plague that they bring with them. 7 rules to be specific, and my biggest frustration with When Evil Lurks is how often people completely disregard the obviously correct thing and do the exact opposite. Ruiz doesn't wind up shooting Uriel, but the fact that he went to the house with a shotgun and seriously considered doing this when he was fully aware that shooting them only spreads the plague further and will damn him and his wife in the process causes a lot of dissonance in the capabilities and intelligence of these characters. I get that people get caught up in the fear that comes with situations like this and won't always think clearly. I talked about this a ton in my Halloween Kills review, but with these very defined rules being laid out early on, it makes it really frustrating to see just how often people blatantly break them with no potential upside. That sort of decision making is going to come around again when we get to the end of the movie, but it happens throughout the runtime. Dissonant really is the best way to describe how these characters handle themselves, because when they talk about tactics and the best way to move forward, they seem like they're making the right decisions and fully understand how to properly navigate, but once it comes down to it, they often make the worst possible decisions, so it makes it really difficult to get a proper grasp of just how capable they are. Now, we do see Uriel try and manipulate Ruiz into shooting him then and there, as the demon inside him tries to make the man spread the evil around. And it is established later on that the possessed ones are able to influence children, but as far as I can tell, beyond these attempts at manipulation, the adults aren't vulnerable to the possession without directly coming in contact with the infection. All that being said, there is one point that could explain why people consistently make decisions that seem so obviously stupid. After the movie's premiere, Rugna did a Q&A with the audience where he answered a question about the inspiration for the movie. He explained that it came from seeing pesticide contamination in rural farmland lead to the workers getting cancer. Even children were exposed to these pesticides because they often lived in poverty and entire families needed to work to make ends meet. It would be on the news and people were aware of it, but no one really made the step to come out and help solve the problem. So from that perspective, you could look at this as a creative tool to try and evoke the feeling of having the answers in front of you and the means to help solve the issue, but turning a blind eye like the authorities did when Pedro told them about Uriel. It's possible that's the angle that was being explored, but if that's the case, it feels really out of place for the people who live on the farmland and the ones who are suffering to make these decisions. I'd maybe believe that point more if it was a heavier focus on the authorities not doing what they could to help, even though they have the ability to, but when it's the victims of the situation who keep acting like this, I don't quite buy that that's the angle. Did this stuff kill the experience for me? Honestly, no, and I've talked to a few people who didn't even notice it because pretty much everything else about the movie is fantastic, but it's something that I picked up on and felt frustrated by a few times because it seemed so contrived to have people act the way they do just so things could continually get worse and worse. But it's scarier if you show people doing everything they can to follow the rules and do the smart thing and still have it not work out. With the way certain scenes play out, it just left me feeling like these people were obviously to blame when something bad happened. Anyway, Pedro and Jaime show up to find Ruiz sitting in his car after resisting shooting Uriel, and the three decide to take the rotten out of the house and drop him off hours away. They can't kill him, but he can't move, and they can just leave him sitting in a ditch somewhere and hope no one stumbles across him. Seems to be a mostly solid plan, aside from the not so solid juices dripping off of Uriel's blob of a body that's probably getting all over your clothes, and if you're not careful, I don't know, a dog could sniff those clothes and then get infected, and that... You know what? No, never mind. You should be fine. All seems swell, like Uriel, until a young boy pops up in the middle of the street and causes Ruiz to swerve out of the way, and they somehow don't notice until a long while later that Uriel fell out of the truck bed. I get that they might not have heard it happen in the moment, but Uriel looks substantial enough that Ruiz should have noticed the change in weight pretty much immediately. I'm also a little confused because it's not like we see him outside of the truck after, and we very clearly see the road, but hey, ambiguity is creepy. Anyway, they figure they were far enough out that it's not worth searching for him, and they head back home, leaving the rotten bastard for someone else to deal with. Alright, so coming up is one of the most egregious examples of blatantly stupid decision-making in the movie, and that's when Ruiz's wife calls him out, saying that one of their goats is possessed. There is a really cool moment where Ruiz fires a gun into the air, and all of the goats run away except for the possessed one, which is an awesome and very creepy way of revealing this. The thing is, Ruiz knows damn well not to use a gun. He already fought the urge to later on, knowing what would happen if he did, and drove for 300 kilometers to dispose of the bastard, but now, for whatever reason, he decides to just shoot the goat anyway. It makes zero sense. His wife grabs an axe and rightfully takes him out for that ridiculous decision making, and then, knowing the fate that awaits her thanks to him, kills herself by just swinging the axe into her own face over and over again. Despite the lead up to this being really dumb, the way this bit is executed is fantastic and really unsettling. Her swings get slower and slower each time as she shuts down her brains. It's pretty damn disturbing. That's something the movie does incredibly well in general. It's easy to make a disturbing scene by just pushing things to the extreme, but the way this movie handles the build-up and the payoff to these moments is what makes them stand out so much. There were a number of moments that really got under my skin in a way that hasn't happened in a very long time, one in particular that I'll get to in a sec, and I'm sure you know what it is if you've seen the movie. It's just displayed in a very candid, not overly dramatized way that I really appreciate. Pedro and Jaime decide to leave town, and Pedro wants to warn his ex-wife and his kids about the potential for an outbreak of these possessed ones, so Jaime drops him off at her house in town where her new man answers and isn't super keen on letting Pedro in. He winds up going in anyway and stripping down to his bare ass and asks for a change of clothes since he was carrying Uriel and doesn't want to risk anything. But again, it's like these people just ignore super obvious problems when it's needed to progress the plot. He just leaves the clothes that he suspects are contaminated sitting on the floor and doesn't even acknowledge the dog sniffing around in them. That obviously stupid thinking leads to the most disturbing scene I've watched in a movie in a long time. Pedro and his ex start getting into it. She's not believing him about the dangers that are coming, and the whole time this is going on, it keeps flashing back to the dog sitting next to Vicky, Sabrina and Leonardo's daughter. You just know something's gonna go horribly wrong, and it does. It's an example of something where you really don't see all that much, but the short glimpses we get are so realistic and brutal that it leaves an insane mark on you. Vicky gets absolutely ragdolled by this dog, and what I really love is how people don't realize what's going on at first. Pedro and Sabrina are arguing so they don't notice anything, and Santino slowly walks over to investigate in shock before being treated to an image that will never leave my head, and I probably can't show it on YouTube. His reaction feels so genuine, and the panic that shot through me for this whole scene was something that I haven't felt in a while. Also, I should note here that the interaction between Pedro and Sabrina is a huge highlight of the movie, where you really can feel the rough history between these two despite us never seeing them together before this fight. Virginia Garofalo gives an absolutely stellar performance that does a lot of heavy lifting for establishing this dynamic. There was a lot riding on this scene for these two because, well, Sabrina dies a couple minutes later after Leonardo tracks down the dog, shoots it, gets infected, and crashed into her at the house. Because she's barely in the movie, it's all the more impressive how impactful her performance is. Also, right before Sabrina dies, the movie's got another disturbing trick up its sleeve where Vicky shows up without a mark on her, but we know better. She ain't your daughter, and to top off this bone-chilling sequence, she starts jumping up and down with joy and dancing around after Sabrina gets crushed. Definitely a sequence that'll stick around in your psyche for a while. Yeah, if you're not chill with seeing kids die in movies, let me tell you right now that Sabrina eats Santino's brains later on after her possessed form shows up at a house that the group is staying at. Enjoy! What I really love about how this movie handles those scenes is that they don't feel even remotely cheap. It's very easy for a movie to rely on this kind of thing as a crutch, but when these moments come up here, it feels a hell of a lot more like it belongs. It's still really disturbing, but it's in a way that services the story and really raises the stakes. A lot of the time in film, you have this safety net for kids where you can be pretty sure they won't die. Evil Dead Rise went a little further than you expect by taking out the teenage characters, but that little girl made it out alive. Not the case in When Evil Lurks. There's something I really appreciate about a story that pushes things this far and has zero boundaries, because it creates this air of genuine risk for every single person involved. No one is off the table, so you better be damn careful how you conduct yourself. Just a shame these characters continue to act dumb as shit, so it's really hard not to feel like they totally could have avoided these situations very easily. Like, for the love of God, later on in the movie they meet up with Mirta, who used to be a cleaner. She's extremely knowledgeable about the possessed, and Pedro is very attentive to what she has to say, but when she says that Jair's behavior is consistent with how autistic people react when they get possessed, he disregards what she has to say. Anyway, Mirta is how we end up getting a lot of the information about the possessed, and the scene where she tells Pedro about her history with them is absolutely fantastic. Info dumps like this can be super contrived, but I do think it was necessary here. These scenes between characters are the glue that really holds the movie together because of just how well acted they all are, both in the intense moments and the more subtle ones like this. Alright, well, it's that time, ladies and gents. We're doing ending talk. I have made this video assuming that you've already seen the movie, and I've already spoiled everything else, but hey, here's a warning if you don't want the end spoiled. So Mirta explains that Uriel is the cause of this outbreak, and he's hidden away somewhere, and since the possessed have a particular influence over children, they decide to check the elementary school, where they find a bunch of kids who resemble me and my friends in class after a long lunch break gardening. The kids make a few attempts at lying to Pedro and Mirta to get them away from the school, and in the only funny scene in the movie, Pedro gets sick of this shit and just beats the hell out of one of them. So they know Uriel's around here somewhere, and turns out he's hidden under the stage in the gymnasium, covered in lime to try and hide the scent. He's in the process of giving birth to what's essentially the Antichrist, so the kids have been keeping him hidden here to give him the absolute best in the business prenatal care a soon-to-be parent could wish for. This is adorable. Mirta starts setting everything up for killing Uriel in the way that actually works, but fucking Pedro thinks it's a good idea to believe the child that he literally just beat up for lying about there being an axe in the other room that might help them. So he runs off despite Mirta's pleas, and she gets murked. The Antichrist is born and walks off into the sunrise, sparing Pedro and leaving him with a mark that will seemingly never wash off. What a phenomenal shot this is, by the way. This is so eerie. Jaime returns after re-crushing Sabrina, which seemed like an odd choice when he could have hit her in any direction, but it's all love, baby. Before the brothers left their home, they allowed Uriel's brother to stay in their barn because his mum went missing and he didn't know where to go. It turns out he's actually the one who killed the cleaner they found split in half. Apparently the top half was eaten, and he says he did the same thing to his own mum, all under the influence of Uriel. The final reveal is that Mirta was absolutely right about Yair being possessed, which Pedro learns as he's feeding his son ice cream and the dude vomits up his nana's hair. Pedro and Jaime join each other outside in the utter loss of everything that's happened in one of the more bleak endings to a movie this year. It's a fantastic long shot where Pedro screams in agony and Jaime just looks so completely lost. The two brothers still have each other, at least for now, but that evil has been unleashed onto the world and they couldn't save the people who were depending on them. Well, they could have if they'd changed their clothes before they left the fucking house and paid a little more attention to Uriel during the transport, but hey! So that's When Evil Lurks. I feel like I've spent more time criticizing the decisions made by the characters than I have praising the other elements of the movie, but I genuinely really enjoyed it, and it's one of the better horror movies that come out this year. There's this incredibly unsettling tone that feels so hopeless and brutal, and the movie has multiple bone-chilling moments that leave a lasting impression. It's super well acted by everyone and has a really unique take on the possession/plague genre that works super well. Its world is well established and really interesting, but it does feel like so much of this movie is marred by horrifically stupid decisions made by people who seem to know better until something bad needs to happen to move the story forward. If that had been handled better, this movie would be damn near perfect, but as is, it's a really great and disturbing horror flick that's still a must-watch for fans of horror. Just as long as you know the kind of thing you're in for. It's brutal. It's truly got no limits, so just be prepared. I highly recommend When Evil Lurks, and it's pretty high up on the list of releases this year. I'm now very interested in checking out Terrified, which is the previous film from the director of this one. I've seen it around for a long time, but the poster is really dumb, so I never paid it much mind, but I'm now reconsidering. Next week kicks off the festive season, and the first movie we'll be looking at is Christmas Bloody Christmas, a slasher about a robotic Santa killing people. Awesome. Until then, thank you for stopping by Rocklin Graves. I hope you've enjoyed your stay.